You're listening to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Grant Hardy. Mark Carney was sworn in as Prime Minister on Friday, March 14th, with a slimmed down cabinet of 23 ministers. That's down from 36 under Justin Trudeau. Advocates are heavily criticizing Prime Minister Carney for eliminating cabinet positions dedicated to people with disabilities, as well as women and gender equality issues. Rabia Khedr is the National Director of Disability Without Poverty, a grassroots organization dedicated to lifting people with disabilities out of poverty. And she's here to discuss the diversity, equity, and inclusion in Canada, in our politics for 2025 and beyond. Rabia, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
First, can you introduce us to Disability Without Poverty and, how the organization began, what sort of advocacy work you've been involved with?
Absolutely. So Disability Without Poverty is a nonprofit registered Canadian charity, grassroots, funded by philanthropy. We are not funded by government. In fact, we are funded by good people who want to do good and want to see good done in our society so that no one's left behind, so that particularly people with disabilities are not left behind. So we are funded through private and public foundations. We came to being because in 2020, COVID happened. We were definitely left behind. We had a minister in government who had a disability, who really organized, and there was a lot of advocacy work spotlighting disability poverty to government. And the Prime Minister, in the fall of that year, in the speech from the throne, promised to lift disabled people out of poverty by way of establishing a Canada Disability Benefit. Well, some of us heard that and said, we can't trust these governments to do this to the best of their abilities by themselves. We need to get our hands in there and get our hands dirty to make sure that they do it right. So the then Minister Carla Qualtrough was given the mandate for the Canada Disability Benefit. The disability community had good access to her because this was her personal thing, right? Her legacy was to do disability right in government. So we started to come together and organize as a grassroots organization from coast to coast to coast, bringing people with disabilities to the forefront as its leadership and those paid to do the work. So we are truly embodying nothing about us without us. And from day one, we have been laser focused on the Canada Disability Benefit, seeing it through to reality and seeing it through to what it is now that we're not that happy with, but systems change it is.
Yeah. So since we're talking about the benefit, let's just touch on the Better the Benefit campaign. I certainly was excited as anyone else to see the idea that the government is serious about lifting people with disabilities out of poverty. Maybe the reality didn't quite match the rhetoric. So at the time, and when we spoke to you last, the historic Canada Disability Benefit was woefully inadequate in terms of amount, eligibility, and even how you apply for it, and some uncertainty regarding clawbacks of other benefits. So have any of these issues been addressed?
No, that's the short answer.
An easy answer.
No, they have not. And in this journey, we went from where's the bill to budget the benefit to better the benefit today. And we are standing solid on our call to action to better the benefit. We are asking disabled people, caregivers, allies to come together, riding by riding, constituency by constituency, and go meet with candidates. We have created a tool called the Advocate. So the community advocates are available on our website. We are holding private town halls online by registration only. Coaching and supporting people in their messaging and training them on how to go about engaging with political hopefuls and to have some clear asks, to share their stories, because a lot of times what happens is, people who are running, they just focus on the party platforms. The
Mhm.
party platforms may or may not include what we want. There are lofty promises sometimes made and not kept, but face to face has power. So going and sharing our lived experience with a candidate has a lot of power, because then they cannot say they did not know what was happening in their backyard.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really important. It's really going to be important to encourage those allies to join us, because I would imagine this is going to be a very easy time for these issues to be pushed aside, what with the trade war, economy crisis, and that is just not something that should be happening.
Well, that is so true. And history repeats itself. COVID was an example. There was a global pandemic. Able-bodied people put themselves first. And now we have a trade war again, where able-bodied privileged people will put themselves first. And who will be left furthest behind? People with disabilities, women with disabilities, racialized people with disabilities, etc., etc., etc. So the more further back you're pushed because of race, gender, and our lived experience of disability, the more likely we are to be forgotten in these campaign promises.
And that is reflected in the current cabinet. So let's just get into that as well. And very notably, our absent ministers responsible for women, gender equality, youth, official languages, diversity, inclusion, and persons with disabilities, and seniors. I believe, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's at least been someone representing women's issues in the cabinet for quite some time. So this is a very historic absence. How should this make us feel?
Well, again, our first reaction was, we know that they're going to have some political rationale for trimming back cabinet, but fascinating that they marginalize the marginalized in terms of representation in cabinet. It doesn't mean that there won't be a minister responsible for our issues. It just means that it's not a headline cause around the cabinet table anymore. So the power, it can be argued that our power to advocate has been diminished.
Mhm.
Although, political analysts will say, well, the smaller the cabinet, the more clout each minister has. So there's arguments on both sides. Just the reality is, if it's not in the headline, it doesn't catch headlines.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it, actually. And I think for sure in 2025, especially, I feel like it's more critical than ever for these minority groups to have dedicated representation. Is this a really historically important time for these marginalized people to need extra representation?
It definitely is 2025. And more than ever before, we know that our issues are under attack, at least by our friends on the other side of the
Mhm.
border. And given that reality, those are very scary signs. And if we look at history, just, over 75 years to 80 years, 90 years ago, we look at history and we look at, the Nazis, and we look at Hitler, and we look at the Holocaust. Who was first? Disabled people
Mhm.
and racialized minorities. They were experimented on. They were, the technology devices, weapons used for the Holocaust inflicted on 6 million Jews were first experimented on 200,000 disabled people that we often forget.
Yeah, it seems like the outrage towards diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and people's determination to put a stop to them, it seems like very manufactured outrage to distract from the actual cause of it becoming more fascist or dictatorial in American politics.
It's the outreach is very limited. Typically, when times are tough, uh, you know, the tough start picking on others. So when times are tough economically and socially, those that hold power in our system, in our society, find themselves under pressure and find themselves losing some of their privileges and power. So they start picking on others. And when I say others, they actually start othering. So discrimination thrives when times are tough.
Yeah, and it's a good point you made about just this historical context as well. I can't remember the author of the quote, but there was someone who recalled from history that first you go after this group, no one stops you.
Yeah.
You go after this other group, and then eventually they go after the rest, and there's no one left to stop them.
Yes, absolutely. I love that quote as well, and I don't recall who said it, but yes, first they came for XYZ and nobody spoke up. Then they came for ABC and nobody spoke up. Then they came for me and there was nobody to stand up for me. Right? So it will come to those in power. When we let tyranny thrive, tyranny will hit home. But who will be left to combat it?
Yeah, and we really need to make sure Canada doesn't go down that road for sure.
And that's why it's really, really, really important that we recognize as disabled people that we are the 27%. That's one of our hashtags. We are 27% of the population. So yes, we are the 27%. We have to have our vote count. We have to demand that our issues are given serious consideration and responsibility in whichever government rises up on April 28th.
Yeah, so I was curious to ask you about this. 27%, that's absolutely huge. Like, that's a huge percentage of the population. Why do you think it's been historically so difficult to wield our political capital or influence that we should have with such a massive number of people that have disabilities?
Well, we face barriers. We face barriers to participating. Sometimes in the past, I remember an ad being on television about elections or something, and it was just images. There was no audio, and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? Until I asked somebody. Again, when disabled people are struggling, living in poverty, facing social isolation, technological isolation, they can't go out and vote. And look at the most recent Ontario election. Okay. When do we hold it? In the dead of winter, when there's been a huge snowstorm that we haven't been able to mitigate and shove away, and we've built up all these windrows. How are people to get to polling stations when they can't get out of their house or go or run their scooter or wheelchair down the sidewalk and cross the street safely? And then let alone, the ballot process and accessibility of the polling stations and, technology. Hey, able-bodied people, you cited privacy all these years for all kinds of work that disabled people could have done from home. When COVID hit, there was no problem doing sensitive work from home in finance and justice and taxes and everywhere, right? Like there was no problem working from home with all the private data of Canadians, no matter what. And now we still can't get our act together with online voting that would make it so much more accessible. It's just because they don't want some of us to vote because they know how we would vote.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective for sure that, some of these barriers seem like they're not intentional, they're just horrible, but maybe on some level it's a subconscious, I don't know, partially intentional, or I guess it's just one of those things. You don't really know why it is, but there are always barriers to keeping marginalized people out of political participation.
Of course, of course,
Yeah.
of course, absolutely, of course. I ran for city council once upon a time. And I went door knocking in places that most people don't go door knocking. And I
Mhm.
remember once going into a building and knocking on a door, and the door automatically opened. And the woman there was in a hospital bed, and she said, I would love to vote. I just can't go anywhere to vote. And once
Mhm.
upon a time, the returning officer from the elections office used to come to my home for me to cast my ballot. But apparently, nobody knows about that, and they don't do that often. So,
Yeah.
disabled people want to vote, they just don't have a way to vote.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I want to get into. We're definitely going to get into accessible voting, but just a few more things about the current Liberal government. We talked a little bit about how they've defended their decision to consolidate those cabinet roles. What do you think about the rationale versus what's really going on here?
Well, I'm hoping that post election, reality will kick in and we will see certain positions highlighted more, even in mandate letters. If we see them reflected in mandate letters clearly, that will give us that opportunity to leverage whoever the minister is, and advocate and build up our allyship with them to have our issues heard and advanced.
If you're comfortable answering this, I found this very interesting. The Minister of Jobs and Families, Stephen McKinney's portfolio includes seniors and persons with disabilities in that new cabinet. And in a statement, McKinney referred to Canadians with disabilities as handicapped people. My first impression is this maybe wouldn't be a huge deal, just some random person on the street saying
Right,
the
right.
word. I might not point it out. Is this a big deal for someone who is having our issues added to their portfolio?
Well, we actually talked about appropriate language in a news story. I commented on that. It was published. The minister, in a meeting with people with disabilities, with the minister's disability advisory group, did come and explain himself, and he highlighted the fact that in a media scrum, since he is bilingual, he was answering questions in French and English, and in French it is persons de situation handicapée. My French is terrible, but the word handicapped is used, and he did a literal translation of his response into
Okay.
English. So I'll just have to take that at face value. He did express his personal commitment to disability and the fact that he had a severely disabled brother.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll cut him some slack on that one.
Yeah. Totally fair. Totally fair. How about women and two SLGBTQ plus individuals? And I've heard some concern for sure from those communities as well, especially given again the politics happening in the world this year. How are those individuals' concerns in danger of not being heard?
Again, I think all equity issues are being sort of silenced or made invisible for the moment, for political gain across the board. There's this sort of sudden resistance to woke culture,
Hmm.
and all of that is stemming from uh, what's happening south of the border. And like I said, discrimination. racism, all the isms that fall under human rights really, really gain steam and thrive when people in positions of power find themselves not thriving anymore. So when a white man is out of a job, he will blame the black man, the indigenous man, the brown man, the colored woman, the immigrant, everybody else but the white man.
Yeah, that's so interesting and so scary that
and it's so irrelevant to me being blind, but people see color.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I was born blind. I'm not even really sure it occurred to me that people even looked different as different colors as a kid, but yeah, it gets drilled into you pretty quickly by the sight of people who are all concerned about it.
Yep. Fixated, in fact.
Fixated,
and especially when they say they don't see color, they certainly see color.
Okay, so we have many marginalized groups who are concerned about our issues maybe flying under the radar, under the rug. How can we take a look at the budget and see if our fears are reflected in the budget for the upcoming year?
Well, the Canada Disability Benefit was budgeted last year at $200 after we launched all kinds of campaigning efforts. Like we had 70,000 postcards circulating across the country, being sent off to the finance minister and then deputy prime minister saying budget an adequate benefit. And they came out with $200, ignoring that sentiment. We published numerous op-eds in English and French. We ran billboard ads. We ran radio spots. We told the story of disability poverty in every way possible, including through polls. Canadians agreed that disabled people should be lifted out of poverty. In significant numbers, like from 89% to 91% of Canadians. Like we saw growth in the support. And yet we saw an inadequate benefit take its sweet time making its way through the system. We were told, austerity measures. Why does it come why does the burden of austerity measures need to be put on the backs of our society's most marginalized, disabled people living in poverty? Why? So we have $200. $200 is a drop in the bucket. Yeah, it'll help some people. So it's too little for too few. The government itself only plans to, is suggesting that they will lift 25,000 people with disabilities out of poverty. We know there's 1.6 million Canadians with disabilities living in poverty.
And at this point, it's looking like there's not too much we can do about this, or even the uncertainty of the clawbacks, right? Other than just keep pushing, keep advocating, but it looks like that's kind of set in stone for the time being.
It's there, but nothing is set in stone forever. If people come together and rise up. We need to band together as people with disabilities because we are the 27%. And there's another, 50% or so out there that care about us, our parents, our family members, our siblings, our loved ones. There are people in our lives, and all of them need to recognize that nobody should be left behind. Any government needs to recognize that if they want disabled people to fully participate in society, including work, they need to be receiving enough benefits to be ready to get a job. If they can't, present themselves well-groomed with a haircut, nice clothes in a job interview, when they don't have money to put food on the table, how are they going to get a job? So when we say that, if we give disabled people money, they will lose the incentive to work, they will not lose the incentive to work. They will actually have the opportunity to be job ready.
Absolutely. It's all about escaping from that horrible cycle of poverty that so many marginalized people find themselves in.
Exactly. And then those people that have significant disabilities who just can't work no matter how much they want to, or they don't understand the concept of work, do they deserve a life of poverty? No, they don't. And I think all parties agree to that fact. So we need to hold, for lack of a horrible phrase, their feet to the fire,
Yep.
or you know, their promises to their vote to do right by disabled people and better the benefit.
Yeah, it's all about just having the political will to get done something that the majority of people seem to support. We're pretty short on time, but I just wanted to ask you, where do we stand on accessible voting then for the election?
We need to do a lot of work on it, a lot of work, but disabled people should still march to those polling stations and document when they face barriers so people know that we weren't able to exercise our democratic right in a free and democratic society where we have the right to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really important, even if it feels unfair, how many barriers there are, to try our best to make our voices heard. Really appreciate all the advocacy work you and Disability Without Poverty are doing. Do you want to just give out your website so that people can read more about the work you're doing?
Absolutely. Simple. It's www.disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca, and we're on X, Facebook, and Instagram as well.
I am looking forward to another conversation in the future, hopefully. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Pulse.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks so much to Rabia Khedr from Disability Without Poverty for joining us today on The Pulse. The Pulse airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio, repeating every 6 hours. You can also catch The Pulse on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Grant Hardy. Thanks so much for listening.